right now about to come out is a project called Unprecedented, where myself and the director Alex Holder had exclusive access to Donald Trump and his family from about mid-September 2020 to about June 2021. In that time, we interviewed former President Trump 3 times. We interviewed Ivanka Trump 3 times, twice while the family was in office. And we were at the January 6th insurrection. Where the project started was, hey, we have exclusive access to Donald Trump and his family, and you know, it's editorially independent, which is like obviously a huge, you know, point. It was like if it wasn't editorially independent and they had any say over it, I would have been gone. And I think the company that hired me, that I was hired through, they totally would have dropped the project too. That this wouldn't have been something, they were very nervous. So everybody involved coming onto this was like, okay, do you have your own control over it? And the answer was yes. Okay, from that perspective then, nearly anything else that goes on with the project is semi-irrelevant. A, because I can always take my name off of it, right? But B, sort of, you know, once you're editorially independent, at least there's this knowledge that, okay, I did my due diligence, that in fact, there's no undue influence on this project, there's nothing from the outside. Then as Alex Holder, the director, and mine's relationship grew throughout the project evolved, right? And as events changed, the project evolved. And so it started as, I have like a historical responsibility here. Hey, like if you have this opportunity to be editorially independent and this close to people who are affecting the country this much, there's like this historical responsibility. But as I grew, there's obviously an ethical responsibility, a moral responsibility, I think a political responsibility, to look at them rigorously, to, if you're that close, to see every element of them, right? And to embrace their humanity, not because they deserve to be sort of overly empathized with or seen as full human beings necessarily, but to understand that human beings are the people who perpetrate these things. The bet at first was proximity to these very powerful people, right? That was like the first bet in the Trump series, is that if we're close to the most consequential people in the country at this time, we'll get something, right? But I think as time wore on and as sort of the project developed, I think what it was engendering in the country became more important, and particularly in their supporters. We'd finish a rally, we'd finish an event somewhere, and we'd be like, whoa, what did you think about this? What this person said? What do you think about what that person said? What do you think about that woman who said that she can't find a boyfriend because she's going to too many Trump rallies? You know, like what does that make you feel? What does that say about what we're filming? You know, are you uncomfortable with that? What do you think about what's the history here? What are they hearkening back to? I knew from what is it? Father John Coughlin, from the America First movement. From the KKK, that these appeals have always been made to stir up white resentment and white anger, and I kept saying that this is what's happening here. Now, where it ends up, we have no idea, and it ended up in January 6th. One moment, which is less obvious, where I really was, I think my eyes were really open. You can read a million stories about how big Trump rallies are. You can read a million stories about how fervent Trump supporters are. But until you are sitting in a rally, I was in a rally in Omaha, sudden cold snap, it's 10 degrees all of a sudden outside. I had to go buy a coat at Burlington Coat Factory just to like stay a modicum warm. But the whole time I was on fire, not because I was excited by what he was saying, I was horrified by what he was saying, but because I was watching and filming the faces of the people listening to him. And I grew up really religious, and the only analogy I can find is people at a religious event in complete rapture. And that is when I could not believe what I was seeing, which I was seeing a politician, not a spiritual leader, not a reverend, not a televangelist, but a politician who inspired that level of fervor amongst his supporters and belief amongst his supporters. And I think until you're standing there, I try my best through the imagery to get it, and hopefully that comes through, but I think until you're standing there and you're looking at it, you actually you can't believe that's happening. You can't believe that level of dedication and sort of enrapture can happen. And then, I think January 6th is obviously the moment where I can't believe this is happening. January 6th is every moment of it is sort of etched in my mind, and the absurdity of it. You had guys in Revolutionary War garb with the old snare drums that they're drumming along. You know, while they march, you have people dressed up in different outfits. You have a guy I can only describe as like an Ohio suburban dad with, you know, he probably has a minivan and 5 kids, right? But then looking at me with the most convinced eyes saying, isn't this the most beautiful thing you've ever seen? And I normally am kind of quick and quippy and can kind of say like something funny or something that would make them at least feel like I listened to them back so they don't, you know, draw too much suspicion. And I actually couldn't answer. I couldn't even come up with like any response because in my mind I'm thinking, this is the worst thing I've ever seen in my life, you know, or close to it, you know. I'm watching my country disintegrate. And yet you think this is the greatest thing ever, like that like us living in just 2 different worlds was just so shocking and so surreal. But then, I mean, there's so many moments during the actual insurrection. So there's a young woman, Roseanne Boylan, who's from Kennesaw, Georgia. She was trampled under a crowd by the West Gate where I was filming. And all of a sudden I see this group of people move toward me with something's going on. I just tilt the camera down, just like, what is going on? Tilt the camera down. And there's Roseanne's body there, laying lifeless. And she's blue. They then try to perform CPR on her. It doesn't seem to work. And then at a certain point I was like, okay, I don't want to film this, you know, beyond the moment that I got, you know, and some auxiliary moments to explain what it is so that for history, for, you know, for people's knowledge and for sort of the record, this is recorded because I think it's really important that people see that, in the words of her brother-in-law, who said that, you know, Trump killed the people who loved him most that day. That was someone who loved him the most dying because of his lies. And I hold her death against him 100%. And I think it's really important to capture that. At the same time, I didn't want to belabor the point and keep filming it and maybe somehow be in the way and affect how she might get care. But, you know, seeing that, like, that doesn't leave you, you know? And then almost, you know, 30 seconds, 60 seconds later, so what I think is one of those great, like, you're talking about surreal moments, I filmed that and then I decided to pan the camera left, and what do I film? I film a woman, she's crying in reaction to what just happened, and she's wiping her tears in an American flag. If you fucking wrote the script, someone would be like, oh, like, that's on the nose, you should probably take that out, that's like too obvious, right? And you're just like, life is that surreal, like, life is that insane. And then shortly after I filmed that, a guy comes up and tries to rip my camera out of my hands and then attacks me and tries to throw me to the ground. Really luckily, I carry my camera on like a kind of like a rubber band, kind of held the camera in place. And luckily I was able to keep the camera and keep my footing somewhat, but I kind of stumbled down the stairs and I had like 15 people around me all telling me to get the fuck out of there and I'm not wanted there, and yeah, I don't know, you don't look like a Trump supporter to me, and blah, blah, blah. And I managed to like hold my ground and stay there till the end, but that was pretty fucking traumatizing. I think like all those moments, they all add up, and a lot of them are just so surreal. And people's glee that day as well. You know, there's a shot where I have a guy getting a gas mask ripped off his face. He's got a bloody face. He's being carried by 2 guys, and then they get to a certain point, and like literally the Washington Monument's in the background, and they're like at the end of like a buddy comedy. They're like literally like at the end of like The Hangover, and they're like shaking each other, like laughing, going like, that was incredible. And you're thinking like, this is incredible for you? This is what, all of this is incredible? I saw people bloodied, I saw people dying, hurt, and like, this is an incredible day for you? Like, that's nuts. All of the, January 6th is like such a complicated day. It's very clear what the president did. He incited it. Like, that's just like not even a question in my mind. I think the facts bear that out as well. But within the day itself, like with anything, there's these like funny moments, these sad moments, these dark moments, these like, you know, a Vice extremism reporter who we interviewed for the documentary, we didn't use this quote in the film, but she said, I saw a labradoodle. I saw somebody there with their labradoodle. She's like, someone brought a labradoodle to the insurrection. And like, I was just thinking like, yeah, that's what kind of day it was, you know? It was that kind of day, yeah. You know, it's funny, I filmed a lot of Black Lives Matter protests over the summer in 2020, and it's amazing. So rarely was I ever met by somebody who was questioning my motives, and when they did, we talked about it. We had a conversation. What is my role here? Why am I here filming? What am I doing? What am I doing it for? What's the bigger mission? And they were willing to have a conversation about it. We may not agree, or we might agree by the end of it, but and then ironically, those are the protests where people weren't nearly as violent, where people didn't bring weapons, where people weren't throwing spears at cops, where I saw the most police brutality, and where I was brutalized the most by the police. I got to the end of January 6th, and from my experience shooting other actions, other events that were disrupted by the police or whatever, whether it's police action, I was at the end like, okay, like this is where we get arrested. Like they've kettled us, they're leading us out. They have a guy at the end who's putting cuffs on all of us. I gotta figure out how to get this camera to the director before I, go to jail and have to figure this out. And yet then I walked out and nothing was happening. And so I filmed that, and that's in the series. A phalanx of cops. They created like a corridor for people to just walk out into the night. And that moment definitely stuck with me. And that was a moment that was like the contrast was so clear. And like the thought in my mind came immediately with no media influence, with no other voices in my head. The thought was like, oh, this is what it means to have a white riot. This is a white mob. They get treated differently. I think like that awakening to the lengths that folks like that will go and what they'll ignore, is truly shocking, and it was upending in a lot of ways. And I think I lost a lot of faith in our ability to reach across and talk to one another. I think I'm somebody who's always looking for consensus. I'm always trying to find a way forward that benefits everyone to some extent. And I think I've kind of hit more of a realization more and more that at least for a certain group of people, that is just not possible because they're not acting in good faith. Maybe believe more and more that this is a adversarial fight a little bit more than a consensus. That like, yes, there are people who are going to have consensus, but it's not the people who were there that day, and it's not a lot of people. I think consensus is going to have to come from the people who honestly believe that, once again, like the government is here to benefit as many people as possible and to raise people up instead of being for a particular group and a particular ideology and forcing that down people's throats to the point where people are dying on the steps of the Capitol,